Does God really exist? Does God really exist? Why are we so afraid to ask this question? Well, because we could be afraid of the answer, or afraid of the repercussions of what might happen to us if we do start believing there is no God. Or perhaps we're tied to the guilt of even questioning this. But to inquire about it may actually unveil one of the greatest discoveries to humanity yet. If we believe God is the greatest, the King of heaven and earth, then why would we even dare to question a king? After all, various religions have tried to describe this greatness with many details, many images, perhaps many rules, and even rituals. And each religion has their own opinion about this. As a result, these opinions have divided people across the world for centuries. What if God really doesn't exist? And why do we have so many of them in different cultures and parts of the world? Why are so many people afraid of God? And why would God want us to live in this divided world where we have racism, wars, hatred, fighting, sorrow, greed, all exist? Let's take a look at this together, without judgments or prejudices. The speaker wishes you to know that I'm not attacking or I'm not denying God. Just simply at the time of writing, I was inquiring if God really exists. And this was written on the fly. It's not an edited article. It's not, something that I've written before. It's actually being written and inquired about at the time I was writing this, without any presumptions or attachments to beliefs. And in a way, it's written in a form of meditation. The question we are asking at this moment is, does God exist? God, like many other things, exists if you believe it exists. After all, isn't this what many of us tell our children about Santa Claus? Just because you can't see him, it doesn't mean he doesn't exist, right? Therefore, to know the answer to this question, why don't we first try to understand belief? If I believe that Santa exists, and you believe that Santa doesn't exist, by the way, neither of us have actually seen him or met him, but because of our beliefs, we will form opinions and we will argue to protect each other's beliefs. My belief, I will argue against yours. And I'll say that if I believe in Santa, these are the reasons why Santa exists. And then you will say, because you don't believe in Santa, these are all the reasons that he doesn't. So hence, this is a classic example of how believing something, and as we'll say later, how believing anything, actually divides us. Now, let us say that my belief, which comes from my choice to believe, is different from your belief, which comes from your choice to believe something. For example, if I believe organic vegetables are better for you than regular vegetables, then I have bound myself to that belief. Once we make a choice to believe anything or not to believe anything or something, we bind ourselves to that choice. And if our choices are different about the same thing, then we have division. Therefore, as long as I am bound to a belief, my mind is completely unable to look at anything objectively. And the same applies to disbelief. The binding itself is the blinding. And when we believe, we cannot see and we cannot be free. Whether we believe God exists or not is the same problem, because we choose to believe one or the other. So, can we ask the question, does God exist, without the binding of any belief at this moment? When we look at a flower, we can see that it is beautiful and it has a certain form and shape and color, perhaps, and it is there. We can confirm it as a fact that we are seeing it, or perhaps even touching it. And we all have an understanding that no matter what language we use, we agree to understand this and perceive this, that it is a flower, and therefore we call it a flower. However, even though the actual flower itself is not really the word, we still need some way of identifying it with words. Does that make sense? We call it a flower. The word flower is not the actual flower itself. It's just a word so that we can try to understand or have some common understanding of what it is. Now, when it comes to God, it's a little more challenging because it is something that doesn't clearly have a correlation with it. Unlike the flower, we can't really see it or so. And so all we can do is really attach an image to it or an idea around what God could be. And indeed, this is what we have done. In various parts of the world, there are gods for thunder, and gods for rain, and gods for fortune, and gods in various images that promise different things if you pray to them, etc. All of that. And as such, many of these are related to things that we humans seem not trying to understand, or are not trying to, maybe we cannot even control this. Or it could be something greater than ourselves, or something we admire to have within ourselves. And so we can never reach it, and God is greater. And this creates inferiority in humanity as a human, hierarchy, structure. And to me, these are not concepts of love. So, what causes us to bind ourselves to the actual belief? We see an image and we believe God is this. Why do we even ask the question of why God exists? Why do so many people pray to God for some relief or have some request or need? And there seems to be some relationship with the lack of not having something or feeling protected from something we don't want. We seem to put our want into hope, right? We want to hope something into something that's greater than ourselves. And when we do, it seems to come out of this problem of inferiority or needing something that we don't have, that something or someone greater than us has. After all, the God of earthquakes has the power to destroy what we spend years building and protecting, and also the power to kill. So naturally, we might fear something that we are unable to control, something greater than us. So, out of fear of destruction, or death, or pain, we seem to have created a God that helps us, that we can put our hope into, to protect us, rather than destroy us. And we make ourselves so small and we make God so powerful. But this attachment, this binding to the word God itself, or to whatever image we have chosen to bind our belief to, is actually an illusion. And it's not God at all. And yet, all around the world, we have alluded to worshipping a God of some kind, for which, by the way, another person may not be worshipping the same God, but another God, something else. And another person may argue that there's really only one God, and not many. And then we have stories invented over time that try and convince us to follow some kind of truth, which is actually in conflict to another story that's also trying to convince somebody else that is the truth. So, do you see this? If this kind of truth is so true, why do we have so many different opinions? And why is it that we're asking this question in the first place? Illusion. We're not sure. We don't really know, and we're afraid to even want to find out. And it's actually easier to live with the illusion of the images, to live with the illusion of hope into something else. So let's for a moment remove the illusion of the images. Let's take away the images that we are associating with God. This is not easy to do. Let's go into it together. We have an image of God, and we're asking just for the moment to remove the image of God. Right? All the beliefs that you have, let's take it away. What's left? Are we left with the state of the world, the mess that we're in, the wars, the protests, the confusion, all the conflicting opinions from science? We have suicides in the world, disease like cancer, education, which is not education by the way, etc., and all those things. Surely not for these two are all created from illusion? Are they not? How many times have countries gone to war in the name of God? If we believe in God, yet we willingly destroy each other and the earth, surely you can see the end of this illusion. And what is left? If we believe in God and yet we destroy each other and we destroy the earth, surely you can see the end of this illusion. And what's left? What's left after the illusion? This question is probably and notably the most important question you might ever ask yourself. What's left if our image of God, all this time, for centuries upon centuries, for whatever you believe, is an illusion? Then, who invented God? Did God create us? Did we create Him? So, let's look at your concept of God. And God seems to be kind and compassionate and loving and merciful and eternal, right? And since He has created us in His image, then we are part of Him. His image of being loving, kind, compassionate, merciful, and eternal. We are also those. But are you? If God created you, that makes you an incredibly extraordinary human being. Because it seems like He wants you to all lead a miserable life? If God made you, then why is it that you are like this? Shouldn't I be seeing a world of love and beauty, joy, ecstasy, even rapture? So has God created you, or you created God? And to me, it seems that you have created God. Since I wrote earlier, there are thousands of gods invented over many, many years, and there are different belief systems. So we have invented God out of some thought, out of our own thought. And then listen carefully. Then thought decides it's important to worship the image of God that thought itself created. Does that make sense? Do you see how bizarre this is? We invented God out of our own thought, some image that thought creates, and then thought decides it's important to worship that image that thought itself created. So all along, we have been worshipping ourselves from some invented image in our thought and calling it God. Interesting. And if you're following along and you're still here, I apologize if I have actually frightened you. If God has been created out of fear, as we mentioned earlier, or out of dependence and inferiority, then what we have created is only a sense of security that we need, and we have called it God. And we worship God with money and rituals. And when I look back, I was part of this very interesting behavior, unknowingly questioning anything. It was just as it is. You follow the grown-ups when you go to church, for example. And I was part of it once. I never understood it as a child, just followed it, believing that it was the right thing to do. But here we are questioning it, and it's been a very interesting passage to write about. But there's also something beautiful out of this. And, a lot of us see the beauty in God, as I mentioned before. He is loving and merciful and eternal. There's a lot of love correlated with God. And this is where we can all start as a starting point. But to love something that is created out of thought and illusion is also not really love. Love itself is, in its true sense, which really lacks a word, and the word love, L-O-V, has been misused and destroyed by the meaning of modern language, and we can't really justify its real meaning. But perhaps we can call it sacredness or holiness. If you honestly understand what this sacredness is, then you will know the very love we are talking about is God. It's not outside of you. It's not an image you create with your thought, or that was created for you by somebody else's thought or idea. There's nothing to look for when seeking God out there. And God is definitely not something that can be created by human thought. That is not truth, surely. However, to have a mind that is outside of hatred, fear, anger, sorrow, greed, selfishness, that is a mind that is completely outside of the concept of time. Then you have a mind that can understand this sacredness. This might sound complicated, so what many of us do is we go out and we seek gurus and religious leaders, other leaders, authorities, experts, and so forth and so on, to help us understand what we need to do. How do we create this mind? And then we rely on them to help us feel safe and secure. And then when you continue to seek throughout all of our time, right, we're always looking and looking and looking to try and create this ultimate mind, this how I can become outside of hatred and fear and anger and sorrow, how I cannot be greedy or selfishness. Okay? And what we're actually doing is we're creating more illusion, because we're depending on somebody else to tell us how we can be. We're using somebody else's thoughts and process and mind to tell us, you, myself, how I can be. A very interesting concept. And then this is the cycle that we have been caught up in for centuries upon centuries, forever depending on others to help us understand this sacredness of life, depending on books and coaches and thought leaders and everything else. I come to you as no one really, except with a message. The mere fact that you have read this far or listened to me this far may be because you yourself is asking the question. For I am none other than a person like you, who experiences what you experience, who wants to live in a world that is free of fear, where you're accepted for who you are, no matter what, and yet not rely on any belief or set of beliefs to determine my direction, my being, who I am, when all the answers are actually within me. And as long as I don't resist the fact that I need to get down on my hands and knees and crawl around in the dark to find those answers, then I will be able to understand God. But please, don't believe anything that the writer or speaker here says. Ask the questions for yourself. If you want to understand the sacredness I talk about here, right? Please ask those questions to yourself. And unfortunately, most people will say it's too difficult and prefer to rely on the age-old problem of dependence. And where there is dependence, there cannot be love. Where there's vitality, where there's energy, where there's love for life, where there's ecstasy, rapture, there it is.